For years, the palace spoke of Prince John only in whispers, as though his very name carried danger. But behind the locked doors, sealed letters, and erased portraits, Queen Victoria's decision was not simply cruelty, it was protection from a secret that could have shaken the crown. At first, his absence was almost invisible. A chair left empty at a family gathering, a name skipped in polite conversation, a young face missing from ceremonies where every royal child was expected to stand still, smile gently, and remind the nation that the bloodline was secure. Palace life moved forward with perfect discipline. Bells rang. Guests arrived. Carriages rolled through the gates. The monarchy performed its usual miracle. It made disappearance look like order. But Prince John had not simply faded away. He had been removed. Inside the palace, people learned quickly which questions were dangerous. Servants lowered their eyes when his name was mentioned. Courtiers changed the subject with practiced ease. Doctors came and went carrying sealed reports that no one outside the royal circle was allowed to read. Even family members behaved as if silence itself had become a rule of blood. To speak of John too openly was to disturb something buried beneath the polished surface of royal life. And at the center of that silence stood Queen Victoria. It would have been easy to paint her as cold, as heartless, as a mother who chose power over love. But the truth was far more painful. Victoria was not only a queen, she was a woman trapped inside a crown, forced to measure every private heartbreak against the survival of an institution older than any one child. She grieved, but she calculated. She loved, but she feared. And fear, inside a palace, can become more powerful than affection. Because John's disappearance was not merely about weakness, illness, or inconvenience. Those were the words the palace could survive. Those were the explanations polite society would accept. The deeper fear was sharper. Prince John had seen something. Something forbidden. Something that made adults stop speaking when he entered a room. After that single night, the nursery wing changed. Doors that had once stood open were locked. Visitors were turned away. His letters were watched. His questions were softened, delayed, then ignored. And John, still too young to understand the machinery closing around him, only knew that warmth had become distance. He wondered why his mother's face changed when he spoke. He wondered why the people who once smiled now looked afraid. So the question became impossible to escape. What did Queen Victoria fear more, losing her son, or letting him speak? And then came the detail the palace could never fully explain. The records did not simply vanish. Some were deliberately destroyed. But before the palace doors closed around Prince John, there was one night when the child saw something he was never meant to see. It began with footsteps after midnight, a forbidden corridor, and a child too innocent to understand danger. Prince John left his nursery searching for comfort, but what he found beyond the velvet silence of the palace would turn him from royal son into royal threat. The palace at night was not the palace shown to the world. By day, it breathed discipline, ceremony, and polished control. But after midnight, another kingdom appeared, one of dim lamps, guarded doors, and voices that were never meant to travel beyond closed rooms. On that night, Prince John woke not to music, not to laughter, but to raised voices cutting through the stillness like a warning. At first, he listened from his bed, small and unsure, waiting for someone to come. No one did. The footsteps outside grew quicker. A door shut too hard. Then came another voice, lower than the rest, but filled with panic. To a child, panic has a sound long before it has meaning. John followed it. He moved through corridors children were forbidden to enter, passing places where servants normally guided him away with gentle hands and nervous smiles. But the palace had been disturbed. Guards were distracted. Doors that should have been watched were half open. And beyond one private chamber, he found the secret that would change his life. Inside, senior advisors stood around a table with doctors and trusted members of the royal household. Their faces were tense. Their words were sharp. A hidden document lay open beneath trembling hands. Beside it rested a sealed jewel case, its presence too deliberate to be decoration. And then John saw the moment that none of them could explain away, a royal signature being forced onto parchment as if the future itself depended on the ink drying before dawn. He did not understand succession. He did not understand legitimacy, inheritance, or the terrifying power of a name written in the wrong place. But he remembered faces. He remembered the jewel case. He remembered the red seal. And above all, he remembered the sentence that turned the air cold: "If this reaches Parliament, the crown will bleed." That was when Victoria saw him. For one suspended moment, no one moved. The Queen's face did not harden with anger. It cracked with terror. Her hands trembled, her voice dropped, and every person in the room understood the same dreadful truth. The child had seen too much. A doctor was ordered to examine him before morning, but the questions did not feel like care. They circled him, pressed him, tested what he knew. By sunrise, the palace was already rewriting the night. Servants were reassigned. Guards disappeared. John was told it had been a nightmare, but innocence became his curse. He kept repeating details no child should know, and once the Queen understood that a child's memory could become a weapon, the palace began building a prison that looked like protection. Queen Victoria did not lock Prince John away with a cold heart. That was the tragedy. She loved him enough to weep outside his door, yet feared him enough to keep the key. In the monarchy, even love could become a sentence. After the night of the hidden document, Victoria changed in ways the palace could feel, but never dared name. She no longer entered rooms with the same certainty. She listened before she spoke. She watched John not only as a mother watches a child, but as a sovereign watches a danger she cannot bring herself to destroy. That was the cruelty of her position. One part of her wanted to gather him close, kiss his forehead, and tell him none of this was his fault. The other part knew the crown had survived for centuries by controlling truth before truth became public. So she began to suffer in private. There were letters she wrote and never sent, filled with broken apologies that no royal advisor was allowed to see. There were prayers she started but could not finish, because every prayer seemed to ask the same impossible question: could she save the monarchy without sacrificing her son? At times, she visited his door when the corridor was empty, standing there with her hand near the handle, listening to the small sounds of the child inside. But she did not always enter. Fear stood between them like another lock. John did not understand this new distance. He asked why he could no longer sit beside her. He asked why his questions made adults quiet. He asked why people smiled with their mouths, but not with their eyes. And each question cut deeper, because he was not accusing anyone. He was simply confused by love turning cold. The palace gave the world a softer story. His separation was described as medical necessity, a kindness, a way to spare him from pressure. Doctors used careful words that sounded gentle but revealed nothing. Courtiers repeated the phrase "for his own peace" until it became the official lie. For his own peace, his tutors were chosen with caution. For his own peace, his letters were inspected. For his own peace, his drawings vanished whenever they showed certain doors, seals, or symbols. He was not treated like a criminal. That would have been too honest. He was treated like a fragile secret. At dinners and ceremonies, the family learned to move around his absence. Victoria heard his laughter from behind closed doors and felt guilt rise like a punishment, because John still loved the people who were erasing him. His freedom could endanger the monarchy, but his confinement was destroying the child. While Victoria buried her pain beneath duty, someone close to Prince John began quietly questioning whether loyalty to the crown was worth the destruction of an innocent boy. Every royal secret needs witnesses, and every palace has someone who sees too much. In Prince John's locked world, one servant began noticing the contradictions, the missing letters, the guarded meals, the tears hidden behind protocol, and decided the truth could not remain buried forever. The attendant assigned to Prince John had been chosen for one reason above all others: loyalty. Not brilliance, not ambition. Loyalty in the palace, that meant knowing when to bow, when to leave, and most importantly, when not to hear. At first, the servant accepted the official explanation without question. The prince was delicate. The prince needed quiet. The prince was safer away from the heavy demands of royal life. It sounded merciful enough, and mercy was often the mask power wore best. But John did not behave like a boy lost inside confusion. He remembered too much. He spoke with startling clarity about faces, rooms, and words no child should have known. Again and again, he asked about the paper with the red seal, and every time he did, someone nearby seemed to stiffen. That was when doubt first entered the servant's mind. Then came the drawings. John drew what children draw when they are trying to understand what frightens them. Doors, tables, hands, a box. A mark of red. Yet whenever the drawings showed a certain chamber, they vanished. Tutors took them away. Doctors called them signs of distress. Officials described them as childish fantasy. But the servant saw the pattern. The problem was not that John was imagining things. The problem was that he was remembering them. Slowly, a bond formed between the forgotten prince and the person ordered to watch him. The servant became the one listener who did not flinch when John spoke. And in that fragile trust, the boy revealed pieces of the forbidden night. A jewel case opened in secret, a signature pressed onto paper, a royal name spoken with fear instead of pride. That was when the servant understood. Prince John had not been hidden because he was weak. He had been hidden because his memory threatened powerful people. The palace noticed the change. Warnings came quietly at first. Do not encourage him. Do not repeat his stories. Do not mistake kindness for permission. Then Victoria heard that John had been talking again, and fear moved through the household like a cold draft. Desperate, the servant tried to send one of John's letters to a sympathetic family member. It disappeared before leaving the palace. That failure revealed the truth. The walls were not merely guarded by locks. They were guarded by people. Then, hidden among ordinary papers, the servant found something worse. A copied note, marked by inheritance, blood, and a secret older than John himself. But the deeper the servant looked, the clearer it became that Prince John was only one piece of a much older secret one locked inside the royal vaults. Inside the palace vaults lay more than crowns and diamonds. There was one jewel case no one displayed, one necklace never worn, one inheritance never explained, and Prince John's mistake was seeing the symbol that connected a forbidden jewel to a forbidden bloodline. The mystery had begun in a nursery, with a frightened child and a door he should never have passed. But it did not end there. It reached lower, deeper, into the guarded heart of the monarchy, where jewels were not treated as ornaments, but as proof. In royal hands, a necklace could mean loyalty. A bruch could mark favor. A crown could turn a person into history, and one hidden jewel could threaten the story a family had spent generations forcing the world to believe. The servant did not understand that at first. A jewel case seemed like a detail, something a child might remember because it glittered in the middle of fear. But the copied note changed everything. It did not speak openly. Nothing in palaces ever did. It used careful phrases, old names, and references to a private inheritance that had never appeared in public records. At the center of it all was a necklace linked to a secret marriage, a hidden heir, and a claim that could not be allowed to breathe. That was why John's memory was dangerous. He had seen the case on the night of the secret meeting. He had heard the fear in adult voices when the document was signed. To him, it was only a box, a paper, a room full of people acting strangely. But to those who knew the history, that jewel was a silent witness. It carried a truth no speech could safely express. If John ever described it in public, anyone familiar with the old family's scandal would understand exactly what he had seen. Victoria knew this. That was the burden behind her silence. She was not simply hiding a child from embarrassment. She was trying to stop a family war before it began. The document John glimpsed may have protected one branch of the royal line while condemning another to permanent shadow. If exposed, it could raise questions of legitimacy, inheritance, and betrayal. It could turn private grief into public crisis. Inside the palace, factions formed without ever announcing themselves. Some wanted John hidden forever, believing the boy's isolation was the price of survival. Others thought time would bury the matter naturally, if only everyone remained calm. But one person watched the situation with colder ambition, realizing that John's knowledge could become a weapon against Victoria herself. Then the servant learned the final detail that made the cover-up undeniable. Shortly after John's confinement began, the forbidden jewel had been removed from the vault. Not displayed, not recorded, removed. And while powerful adults fought over bloodlines, titles, and buried promises, John asked only why no one believed him. And as the forbidden jewel vanished deeper into the palace vaults, another threat emerged not from outside the monarchy, but from within Victoria's own circle. Queen Victoria may have ordered the lock, but she was not the only hand on the key. Behind her stood an advisor who understood the brutal truth of monarchy. A hidden child could be managed, but a speaking child had to be silenced permanently. He did not look at Prince John and see a lonely boy. He saw a danger wrapped in innocence. To him, every word John remembered was a spark near dry paper. Every drawing, every question, every mention of the red seal and the jewel case was not childish confusion. It was evidence waiting for the wrong ears. And in the world of royal survival, evidence was more frightening than guilt. So he went to Victoria with fear sharpened into strategy. He spoke of newspapers hungry for scandal, of Parliament demanding answers, of rival claimants rising from the shadows with old names and older grievances. He warned of foreign courts laughing behind silk curtains, of public humiliation, of the crown itself becoming a question instead of a certainty. He did not need to shout. His calm made the threat sound even worse. John, he argued, could not remain a temporary problem. Children grew. Memories changed shape, but they did not always disappear. A boy who repeated secrets in a nursery might one day speak them before guests, diplomats, or enemies who knew exactly how to use them. Isolation, the advisor insisted, was not enough. It had to become permanent. Victoria resisted the coldest version of his plan. She would not allow John to be treated as a prisoner in name. He would have tutors. He would have care. He would have comfort. But the advisor understood grief, and he used it cruelly. He told her mercy could destroy everything she had protected. He made her believe that a mother's softness might become a monarch's ruin. Then the palace tightened. Visitors were reduced. Letters became rarer. Guards grew stricter. Even trusted attendants found doors closing before them. The servants saw John changing, not from illness, but from fear. He sensed what everyone refused to say aloud. He was not being protected. He was being erased. Then John overheard the words that broke what little safety remained. They were discussing moving him away from the main palace entirely, to a distant royal residence where no journalist, No sympathetic relative, no courtier with a conscience could reach him. For Victoria, it was another impossible bargain. Keeping him near risked exposure. Sending him away felt like abandonment. The advisor then turned suspicion toward the servant, warning that attachment could become betrayal. Dismissal was threatened. The hidden note and copied evidence suddenly became dangerous to keep, but even more dangerous to lose. And when Victoria finally signed the transfer order, she did it with tears she refused to explain. Duty had consumed motherhood. But the moment Prince John learned he was being sent away, the quiet child at the center of the scandal did something no one expected. They thought Prince John was too young, too frightened, too controlled to fight back. But before the carriage arrived, the forgotten prince made one final attempt to tell the truth, not with power, not with politics, but with the only weapon he had left, his own words. By then, Prince John understood more than the adults wanted to believe. He did not understand every rule of monarchy. He could not explain parliament, succession, or why a jewel locked in a case could make powerful people tremble. But he understood one thing with painful clarity. When a child is sent away from the palace learns how to live without him. To John, removal meant disappearance. The news changed him. He grew quieter, not because fear had defeated him, but because he was thinking. For so long, others had spoken around him, over him, and for him. Doctors called his memories confusion. Courtiers called his questions distress. Advisors called his voice a threat. But John still believed there was one person who might listen if he could reach her without guards, without doctors, without the cold hands of protocol closing in. His mother. He believed that if Victoria heard him plainly, she would remember him not as a danger, not as a royal problem, but as her son. So, with the servant's help, he prepared a letter. It was simple. That made it devastating. He did not accuse her of cruelty. He did not demand jewels, titles, or revenge. He asked why telling the truth had made everyone stop loving him. But hidden inside that innocent plea were details sharp enough to cut through the palace lie, the red seal, the jewel case, the frightened advisors, the hand forced toward the parchment, and the signature no one wanted named. John chose his moment during a formal family gathering, where politeness held the room together like thin glass. He stepped forward with the letter in his hand. Victoria saw it and froze. She understood at once what the paper carried, not only a child's heartbreak, but a political danger that could not be allowed to unfold before witnesses. Officials moved quickly, too quickly. And in the panic of being stopped, John called out one forbidden name. The room went silent. Several faces changed, just slightly, but enough. They knew. Victoria's expression became unreadable, not cold, but shattered. The advisor leaned in with urgency, insisting the boy had to be removed before whispers became rumors. The servant was pulled away, accused of encouraging instability, warned that one more word would mean ruin. John was taken from the room believing his mother had chosen the crown over him. His last memory was not anger. It was Victoria turning away. Not because she did not love him, but because one more word could have destroyed them all. Yet even after Prince John disappeared from palace life, the secret refused to stay locked away, because silence has a way of leaving evidence behind. After Prince John was gone, the palace did not simply move on. It cleaned the walls, edited the records, and softened the story until truth became rumor. But every erased portrait leaves a mark, and every missing letter proves someone was afraid. His removal created a silence so carefully arranged that it almost looked natural. The palace did not announce a disappearance. It adjusted. Portraits were moved to quieter rooms. Mentions of John became shorter, then rarer, then carefully avoided. Family conversations learned to bend around his name. When guests asked after him, the answers came wrapped in gentle words, the kind designed to sound kind while revealing nothing. He needed rest. He needed peace. He was better away from pressure. Those phrases became the velvet curtain hiding the machinery beneath, because behind that softness, records were altered, letters were intercepted, and memories were trained to behave. The official story did not have to be loud. It only had to be repeated until doubt felt impolite. But the servant, now separated from John, refused to surrender everything. Quietly, dangerously, fragments were preserved. Copied lines, dates, descriptions of the jewel case. The phrase about Parliament. The name John had called out before the room froze. None of it was enough to shatter the palace alone, but together it formed a trail, thin as thread and sharp as wire. Victoria sensed that trail before she ever saw it. In the years after John's removal, she became haunted by rooms that no longer held him. She visited empty spaces where his voice had once echoed. She kept one small object that had belonged to him, not as a queen preserving history, but as a mother clinging to punishment. The crown had survived the moment. But survival had left a wound. The advisor, at first, believed the cover-up had succeeded. He watched the palace settle back into ceremony and told himself the danger had passed. But rumors are not like documents. They cannot always be burned. Among staff, whispers began to stir. Someone had seen letters. Someone had heard about the Red Seal. Someone remembered John speaking too clearly. Then came the missing packet. A bundle of John's letters, believed destroyed, could not be found. The palace searched quietly but urgently, and that urgency proved what no official explanation could admit: the child's words were still dangerous. Some family members began to question whether Victoria had been cruel. Others believed she had been trapped. Some feared the answer too much to ask. John's absence became a warning carved into royal life: the family protects itself first. And the servant, knowing time would outlive fear, hid one final piece of evidence inside something ordinary. Victoria discovered too late that not everything had been destroyed. The real scandal was not only that John had been confined, it was why the monarchy needed him forgotten. He was locked away not because he was broken, but because he was proof. And when the last surviving clue finally came to light, it revealed the hidden reason Queen Victoria had feared her own son's freedom. The truth was never that Prince John was too fragile for the world. The truth was that the world Victoria ruled was too fragile for Prince John. He carried a secret that could stain a bloodline, expose a betrayal, and prove the crown had survived by burying its own child. The final clue did not arrive like a thunderclap. It surfaced quietly, almost shamefully, from the kind of ordinary hiding place the palace would never have thought to fear. A preserved note. A copied line. A description of the jewel case. A child's words, protected by someone who had understood that innocence can sometimes be more dangerous than evidence. And when those fragments were placed together, they formed the truth Victoria had spent years trying to keep apart. Prince John had witnessed more than a private panic. He had seen proof of a hidden royal arrangement, one tied to inheritance, legitimacy, and the forbidden jewel that confirmed what no advisor dared say aloud. The jewel was not valuable because of diamonds or gold. It was dangerous because of what it represented. It pointed toward a bloodline claim that could disturb the accepted order, expose a concealed promise, and suggest that one branch of the family had been protected while another had been pushed into shadow. That was why the palace feared him. John had connected names, objects, and moments that adults had carefully separated. The Red Seal, the forced signature, the jewel case, the frightened silence, the forbidden name he called out before witnesses. To anyone else, these might have seemed like scattered memories from a confused child. But to those who knew the hidden history, They formed a map straight to the monarchy's most dangerous secret. Victoria's decision now appeared in its full cruelty and tragedy. She had not simply rejected her son. She had made a brutal calculation of royal survival. In her mind, one child's suffering might prevent a national scandal. One locked door might stop Parliament from asking questions. One erased prince might keep the crown from bleeding in public. But the advisor's role made the betrayal darker. He had not pushed for John's confinement out of loyalty alone. The secret protected his influence too. If the hidden arrangement came to light, his advice, his power, and his place near the throne could collapse with it. So he sharpened Victoria's fear until it sounded like wisdom. And then there was John. The servant's hidden evidence proved what the palace had tried hardest to deny. John remembered clearly. He had not invented the jewel. He had not imagined the document. He had not spoken from madness or weakness. He had spoken from memory. That was the heartbreak. The forgotten prince did not want revenge. He did not want power. He did not even understand the full meaning of the secret he carried. He only wanted his mother to believe him. That is what makes the story so devastating. Victoria loved John, but she loved the crown with the terror of someone who believed collapse was always one scandal away. She became both mother and jailer, protector and destroyer, victim and executioner of a system that demanded silence as proof of loyalty. So the question remains, was Queen Victoria the villain who locked away Prince John? Or was she herself a prisoner of a monarchy that forced her to choose the crown over her own child? In the end, the locked jewel case, the missing letters, and the prince whose silence became louder than any public speech all point to one terrible truth. Palaces do not only protect treasures, they protect lies, even when the cost is a child's life. Prince John was hidden from history, but the reason he was hidden may have been the one truth history could never afford to tell. And that is why the locked door was never just about Prince John, it was about the monarchy's oldest rule, protect the crown, no matter who disappears behind it.